Hello and welcome to Lone Star Silver Screen, a podcast about everything that exists at the intersection of Texas and the movies. I'm your host, Austin Zook, and today I am joined by the president of the Dallas Producers Association, Ian Loomer. Ian, thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Excited to be here.
Well, I am excited to have you here. So today you and I are going to talk about the new Texas funding bill that went through a little earlier this year. But before we get into that, I was wondering if you could just tell me a little bit about the DPA and what it is you do there.
So the DPA is the Dallas Producers Association. It is a nonprofit trade group started in 1978. It's all volunteer run and led. So everything we do for this organization is because we love the community. And the DPA has been a lot of things over its years, but right now we really focus on networking and education for the creative production community. While producers in our name and Dallas is in our name, we really span all of North Texas, hosting events and meetups and educational panels and conversations to really just engage and connect everyone from production assistants who are new to the industry to seasoned producers who have been around the block a few times. And so it's really exciting every month to connect and watch this community just kind of thrive and grow, especially with all of these new incentives that are coming down the pipe and to see that engagement and energizing emotion.
And how long have you been associated with DPA?
I joined the DPA at 19 as a member.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm Hair Club for Men. Not only am I the president, I'm a member too, right? So I found my first jobs through the DPA listserv, which is an old school Google group that I kind of call the bat signal, right? So members have this privilege of posting on this listserv. Anyone can join and sign up and get the info. And so people start, asking for PAs, grips, location. A real question we had the other day was, I need a full-fledged Yeti costume for a 6 foot tall person next week. Does anyone have one? Like, ridiculous things get posted. So I started getting connected early on with PA on film sets, and a lot of reality TV was very big in that 2005 to 2010 territory. I joined the board in 2020, which is a perfect time to join an in-person networking organization group. And then in 2021, 2022, I became the vice president. And then I've been serving the past 2 years as president. And my term is actually up at the end of this year. It's very exciting to hand this off to the next cohort who's going to help support that.
Oh, that's awesome. So after you step down as president, are you going to stay involved with the organization? Like, is there an immediate past president position or anything like that?
Yeah, there's kind of an emeritus. Like it's traditional for the president, the outgoing president, to stay on the board for a couple of years as a source of truth and to help support the new officers as they step in. And I'm excited. I'm not going anywhere. I'm very excited to continue to support the DPA and the board, but maybe focus on a few key things that as president, you have to focus on everything, right? And so you're stretched in ways. But as just a board member, I want to focus on a couple other things and on some other cool projects I have that I think are going to support Dallas creatives as a whole, not just production, but the more we grow and the more these incentives happen, the more we are touching, animation and design and technology and dance and art. And, all of these communities are becoming one as all these tool sets kind of cross everything. So I'm focusing on how do I support more than just film folk, but how do I support all creatives collectively?
And I did want to ask, so as far as the association and its work goes, I mean, is there any cross-pollination with other similar groups, maybe in like Austin or Houston, other production hubs in Texas?
We definitely are friendly with all of them. I am a rising tide lifts all boats guy. So you'll notice in like our emails and our newsletters, I'm sharing out other organizations and groups and the events that are happening. I want people to use the DPA as a source of truth. We have members from Houston, from Austin, and there are definitely other organizational groups in those cities. They vary depending on what their goals and their initiatives are. I know the Houston Film Society, Film Alliance, I'm going to butcher that name. I apologize. They're great. They run the Houston Media Conference. They have a series of really cool stuff. And so we talk a lot with them about how can we support each other and how can we make sure that we're uplifting each other's projects and what our organizations are doing. But there's not chapter based, right? We would DPA doesn't have a Austin chapter or a Houston chapter, say like VES, the Visual Effects Society does.
So you are, and maybe people listening have already picked up on this, but you are a man who wears many hats and you have your finger in a lot of pies. So you also are associated with the Texas Media Production Alliance, which may come up over the course of this conversation. So could you talk a little
Right.
bit about what that institution does and what your role is there?
So the TXMPA, funnily enough, was kind of birthed in part out of the DPA. So the DPA was one organization who helped really fight for a lot of the early incentives that Texas got. So in Texas, if you are purchasing something for a film set, you don't have to pay sales tax, which is really cool when you're doing that. A lot of people don't necessarily even know that. And that happened in, I want to say like 2005, 2006. And around that time, when the DPA was getting very heavy into legislative, that's what the officers and the board was very engaged in at that time. The TXMPA was kind of birthed out of that as a way to create an organization that was focused on just legislative goals, as opposed to education, networking, outreach, community building. They were just there to really reach for that. And so over the years, that organization has grown to support Texas all across the state. And there's representation from Amarillo and El Paso to Houston to Dallas. And the board members are an incredible group of talented individuals who run businesses all over the state that engage with film and state legislators at a very high level. So they are really just kind of leading that conversation and helping align the goals of filmmakers in Texas with the goals of the legislators and what they're looking to accomplish every year. So, we really just try and be a guiding hand to help support all these groups and to consolidate that conversation. The TXMPA is not a lobbying body. It doesn't hire lobbyists and engage that, but it definitely engages with all of these organizations, all these different unions to help make sure we're guiding that conversation.
Well, and there was kind of a roadshow this year, going back to the topic of this episode, where we're going to be talking about film incentives, where the TXMPA set up these like town hall type events across the state to educate the local film community and then some of the other groups that would be affected by these incentives and just kind of let them know what the bill was proposing and how it would impact their day to day. So it's things like that they really do. It's educational.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. So especially with this past year, the incentives, this legislative cycle and the one before that were so different because of the amount of money and the potential changes that were happening to the current program against the former program. So the road shows were a way to help kind of galvanize Texas productions and Texas filmmakers to, write to their legislator to engage in the process. There were definitely huge celebrities who were involved in this, right? We had Taylor Sheridan, we had Matthew McConaughey, who were at legislative hearings having conversations. So this legislative cycle specifically, there was so much heavyweight that we were more just like, let's help guide where we can, but let's let them do the heavy lifting.
Right.
And then after this legislative cycle, it's been fun to work with the Texas Film Commission and their team because they're doing a current now roadshow. So we just hosted them in Dallas. Stephanie Whalen, our Texas Film Commissioner, came in, talked about where we stand with the new incentives, what that's looking like, what the roadmap for that is. And that was a really great conversation that I was excited to be a part of.
So I want to talk a little bit about the incentives now. So for anyone listening who doesn't understand, basically a film incentive is something a state can do to attract a production. And it's kind of like a rebate on the money they spend if they meet certain metrics, hiring local cast and crew, filming within the state, et cetera. Is that basically correct?
Yeah, that's a good high level overview.
Yeah. And so for this one, I think historically, Georgia over the past 10 years or so was kind of the gold standard for film incentives. A lot of production moved out there. And the thing I always think about when we talk about production in Texas is Richard Linklater filming Hitman with Glenn Powell, and they want to film that movie in Texas, and Texas doesn't have the film incentives. So they take all that work, they move that production over to Louisiana, and they film it there instead because they got the incentives they needed. So there was clearly a need for this, an overhaul to the existing system. So can you talk to me a little bit about where this bill came from and what it proposed to do as opposed to what we had before?
So we're going to take, honestly, 2 steps back, right? Because this legislative cycle and what we had was built on the one from 2.5 years ago, the previous legislative cycle, because Texas, the way that works is every 2 years, they have a legislative cycle where all of the bills happen, everything changes. Historically, the funding for Texas has been in the 20 to 40 million every 2 years range, which is not terrible, but definitely meets nowhere near Louisiana or Atlanta or even New York and California. And so a couple of years ago, we were able to get a 45 million base funding, but we were going to tap into this 155 million supplemental funding. And we're getting very nuanced and technical here with like how some of these things work and how these budgets work, but they were able to find that fundings for the first time to have this massive amount of capability. And there was some concern, like, can we use it? Is it going to be all gone? And Fred Poston, who's the executive director of the TXMPA, he puts it really nicely in that if our incentives were a concert, all the tickets are sold out. And so we're definitely using that funding. So this past legislative cycle, they took a lot of what was built there. And I don't know how technical we want to get into this. There's two different sections to all of this, right? There's what's the law and what are the rules? What's the law? What's been hard coded into Texas legislation? And then what are the rules that get created by the Texas Film Commission and the lawyers and some of the legislators that are used to help guide that legislation, right? And used to maybe further explain or provide some structure. And so this current legislation, a lot of what were rules from the last year got brought into the legislation and hard coded. And that's percentages, that's values, that's rates. And so it's been interesting to see not a terrible ton has changed. It's been massaging and nuancing what's worked well over the past couple of years. And then how do we make sure we codify that going forward?
Right. So as far as the bill and where it stands today, can you give just a high level overview of what this means in terms of dollars and opportunity to productions in the state?
So the big number, and I was looking for it earlier and I couldn't find it in my notes. The big number they did a study, and for every dollar spent in Texas on film and video, it's like $4.20 goes back into the local economy, which is an incredible return on investment. I mean, if you're if you hear a stock is going to quadruple and give you that kind of return in a year, there's no way you're not investing in that. So it is a really great return on Texans' dollars that are spent. And so this biennium, and for the next 10 years, it is 300 million every 2 years is available for incentives. So it's really equaling about $1.5 billion of incentives. And it's an insane number, thinking that 4 years ago we had $40 million and now we're at $1.5 billion. It's crazy. So the high level is there's a lot of funding here. And without getting too deep in it, maybe somebody's really excited. I've learned a lot. Little film Ian, when he was getting into this, did not know how many accountants and lawyers I would know in my life, but here we are. So Texas is different because Texas is always different, right? We do things our own way. Other states like Atlanta, like California, they have state income tax. And so all of their incentives come from that state income tax where they're able to do a tax rebate. So you finish your film, you do all the accounting, 6 months to 3 years later, you might get a refund on your taxes. Sometimes those credits are sellable. There's a lot of different ways. There's entire cottage industries and businesses that have popped up around managing the sales tax and rebates from these programs. Texas doesn't have state income tax, so we have to find ours a little bit differently. This is a cash grant, which is really exciting. So you have to have all of your paperwork done ahead of time. Everything has to be reviewed ahead of your shoot dates. But at the end, that turnaround on that like cash in your pocket is really fast. And so that's exciting to a lot of production companies and to a lot of especially indie filmmakers on, great, I wrap my film and now I'm going to have this influx to go into post-production, or I'm going to have this influx to go into marketing and start getting it, Oscar qualified, because now Dallas is an Oscar qualifying city, which is really exciting. So it just changes how you think about it. And maybe nobody cares but production accountants on set, but it's fun.
They decide what gets made. So it's important that they care.
So that's the high level of like the funding, right? We have this giant chunk of money. Below that, they have codified what were formerly rules into legislation as far as like the incentive levels go, because everything's built on a sliding scale. So for film specifically, right, we're talking a film podcast, and excuse me, I'm looking at my notes here, like 5% of your film in Texas and there's, you can go onto the Texas Film Commission website, look at all the specific rules. I don't know if we want me reading off a web page here, but it starts at like, you can get for $250,000 to $1 million. So for $250,000, you can get 5% of your costs spent back. Up to 1.5 million is where you start getting 25% back, which is really great. That's up. It used to be 3.5 million to get 20, and now we're at 1.5 million to get 25. And then there's all these little add-ons, what are called uplifts. So are you shooting in a town with 300,000 people or less, like was just done for Leonardo DiCaprio's new film, right? You're going to get an uplift percentage for that. And so after all these little add-ons that, again, I encourage you to go to the Texas Film Commission website, look at that. You can get up to 31% back in cash money at the end of your shoot. And that is figures that talk. And those are figures that production companies all across the world are paying attention to.
So let's say that tomorrow I decide I'm going to make a film in Texas. I've got a budget that meets the minimum requirement. Who decides? Like, who am I submitting my paperwork to decide if I qualify for these incentives?
I would encourage you to talk to not only your regional film commissioner where you're shooting, but reach out to the film commission, like the Texas Film Commission. Their team is fantastic and knowledgeable and pretty quick to get back to you with questions. If you have the funding, they'll send you all of the paperwork. Here's this checklist of things that you need to fill out. The big one is really documentation. And that's the thing that takes the longest for a lot of these. You need to be able to document that you have funding from the bank, that it is somewhere that is accessible and not imaginary, that all of your shooting days, your crew, your hiring, all of that matches the requirements for Texas, which I believe is 35% for resident Texans hired for your production. Then they'll start working through you of here's what we think that is. So before you even step onto set day one, you can know exactly what that's going to look like at the end of production.
So would you say that this new bill puts Texas in the upper echelon of states with incentives? I mean, does this make us competitive with an Atlanta or, a New York?
That was the whole goal of why it was built around. It was to make us competitive with Atlanta, with New Mexico, with Oklahoma, with California. At this point, we're just marketing how ours is a little different. And I think it's a selling point. We've structured ours and built ours. And there's definitely, with the percentages and levels and stacks, we have the great job of getting to educate now the production community and production companies nationwide about why we are competitive in all these states. Because dollar for dollar, it stacks up.
Right. It's going to have all the local film commissioners very busy over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Once it all hit, once it came out, it's definitely been educating, but I know I have conversations with film commissioners who are excited to go to, Toronto International Film Festival. They're excited to go to these places and have these conversations about why our film incentives are so great. And people are responding to it from what I'm told.
Yeah. So what would you say the biggest question mark around the bill is and the incentives package is now that it's been passed?
Mm-hmm. Right now, we are still waiting for some of the rules to get ironed out. So I know the Texas Film Commission is hard at work working with legal and teams and legislators to kind of iron out some of those specifics. Now, that said, you can apply today. There is nothing stopping you from starting that process and submitting. But it's much like when the last legislative cycle happened, it took a little while for the rules to get ironed out and for this massive amount of money to get figured out how we are going to distribute it efficiently, equitably, legally. And so that's what the team is doing now. And that's been exciting to kind of hear the Texas Film Commission, as they've been doing their roadshow, talk and engage and understand like some of the things they're working through. Part of the legislation is they're hiring like 7 new people for their staff to help support all of this. So I know they are super busy going around doing all this. And so that's what I think we're all kind of just waiting to see the final details on. But I want to stress that doesn't and shouldn't stop you from engaging with the Texas Film Commission and starting that conversation now.
Well, and I think the equitable distribution piece is so important because that's the number one thing that I've heard in conversation is that people hear about this bill and they think that's great if your name is Taylor Sheridan or if Jesus is the main character of your TV show, what's this going to do for independent artists or people who are maybe doing something that goes against the grain a little bit. So that is something that's on everyone's mind and that they are trying to address in some way.
It is definitely something they're working through. Again, for some of those rules on what content can be shot, like they're working to get Texas Chainsaw Massacre shot here with all that the content is very broad and very open. And so I can't speak to too much because I'm not on the Texas Film Commission. I'm not part of those things. But I do know the conversation that have been happening is they're wanting it to be as broad as possible, and they are fighting for that to be as broad as possible. And so as far as the breakdown of who's getting the money too, you can actually look on the Texas Film Commission website and see what last legislative cycle went towards. And Taylor Sheridan's not up there a whole lot. Like some of his content, I don't even know if passes some of that. So there, if you look at what it is, it's a lot of independent film. It's a lot of commercial content takes advantage of it, a lot of TV show content. And so it's interesting to see what is a term I love called croomer. What is the crew rumor, the croomer, and what's the reality? And what I'm seeing is a lot of the funds going to smaller productions. They're not being absorbed by some of these big entities. They're getting some of it, absolutely, because they're providing a ton of work for a ton of people, but it is not getting as much as the croomer would suggest.
Well, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned commercials and TV shows, because one of the things I learned when I went to one of those road shows that TXMPA put on was that this bill isn't just for filmmaking. It's really any kind of media production could, in theory, apply for this if they met the requirements. So, I mean, that includes even maybe digital content creators, right? Like YouTubers, if they had enough scale.
We have in Dallas several large YouTubers who are encouraged to take advantage of these incentives because all of that can apply to it. You're doing a big production that's going to cost, these YouTubers sometimes are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a single video or a series of videos. They can absolutely take advantage of this kind of content. Animation, VFX, video games, like all of this is part of the incentive and how it's managed. So everyone can take advantage of it. And I think a thing that isn't talked about like a ton of how these incentives work is there's a heavy cap. Like $250,000 is a chunk of change. Like I don't pretend like it's not for the $50,000 indie filmmaker who's got a Kickstarter kind of thing. But what happens when all of these incentives are in place and all these production companies come is I see a expanding of the production community, right? I've been working in crews and hiring for 20 plus years now as part of this production community. And I notice every time a large production or a large film comes to town, I start having to scramble a little bit more for who am I booking, because these people are getting pulled away on those sets, or they're getting pulled away on all of the world around the set. So you might not be playing DP on The Chosen, but maybe you're playing DP on a behind the scenes for a company who's supporting it in a certain way, right? So all of these kind of like opportunities start arising. Maybe an internal agency uses someone normally who gets pulled away on a shoot for Taylor Sheridan. So now somebody else gets a chance to upskill and up level or to step in with that client. And so I see this like secondary, tertiary growth of creative community because they have to and have to step in and fill some of these roles. And that's really exciting for me to see.
So my last question was actually going to be, I mean, over the next 5 to 10 years, in a perfect world, how would you see this impacting the Texas film community? So I think you just kind of answered that, but is there anything else you would add along those lines?
Well, the bill was titled "Make Texas the Film Capital of America." So that's what I'm jonesing for. Let's make Texas the film capital of America. So I'm a Texas native. I've lived other places, but I love Texas, lived here most of my life. The thing I love about Texas production specifically is that we want to work with people that at the end of a 16-hour day, a week of 16-hour days, we can go have a beer with, right? That you can like want to be friends with. We are a different kind of breed of production community. And I keep seeing this as people are now migrating from Atlanta. They're migrating from New York and LA. Some of them coming back home after doing a stint of, a decade in LA in that film world. Some of them moving here for the low cost of living and no state tax. And they see the growing production community. And they are all just kind of like fascinated by the inclusive nature of our production community. So I hope that we can continue to grow that and to build a larger infrastructure and bring, Hollywood level films here on the regular, so that there is a ongoing, consistent workforce. And we start hosting all these other secondary events that happen around production, right? Because film tourism is what drives a lot of these incentives, because we're trying to just keep and bring people to Texas.
Ian, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Absolutely.
Anybody heard this and they want to keep up with you and all the good work you're doing, where can they go to find out?
Sure. DallasProducers.org is where you're going to find the Dallas Producers Association. Check out, we got really cool events coming up through the end of the year, working with Resolution Film, which is dome-based animation to the Polyphonic Spree. It's a visual album. Won the South by Southwest XR Award. And then our holiday party at the end of the year is a really great time to connect. And then if you want to get more involved and learn really what's happening on film incentives in Texas, TXMPA.org. Both of those places, you're going to get the latest and greatest on film incentives and what's happening in our production community.
All right, sir. I really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you again soon. And that was my episode with Ian Loomer. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen, and if you want to support the show, please remember to rate, review, and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in next week for my conversation with filmmaker Julian Soul Jordan. We talk about Robert Rodriguez's book, Rebel Without a Crew, and Julian's own filmmaking journey. Until then, take care, and I'll see you in the theater and on the dusty trails of Texas.